Ready one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Today I have a book review for you of this one, Ma'am Darling, 99 Glimpses of Princess Margaret by Craig Brown. It's a 2017 release and I finished reading it just a couple days before Christmas and haven't had a chance to prepare a proper review until today. So, I may be the perfect reviewer for this book because, and it's probably the only thing I've ever been perfect at in my life. Do you think I can fit that on my resume? What do I mean? I have been obsessed with Princess Margaret since I was 10 or 11. I developed an early interest in the British royal family, I guess originally out of some kind of patriotic Canadian monarchist sensibility. But I have not retained the monarchism at all, or barely at all. My monarchism only rears its head when I hear Americans poo-poo the royal family as if they don't have their own. But I'm not much of a monarchist, but I have retained all my life a fascination with the British royal family, almost as a private mythology. And I'm talking about from Queen Victoria to the present. I think when I was about 11 years old, I read a 900-page biography of Queen Victoria. But from that early age, as a proto-gay little bookworm, Princess Margaret has always been one of my favorites. And I read at least one biography of her when I was that young. So, for those of you who don't know about Princess Margaret, because you're too young, let me just give you a quick sketch. She was born in 1930. Her father was the second son in the royal family, and she was the second daughter, so her chance of ever becoming queen was incredibly remote. However, 6 years later, after her grandfather died, her uncle David became king, and he was deeply enmeshed with a twice-divorced American woman named Wallis Simpson, and he became Edward VIII, and he abdicated the throne because he could not marry a twice-divorced American woman at that time. So then her dad, Bertie, became king, King George VI, and Margaret's older sister Elizabeth became the heir presumptive, and then queen. Princess Margaret never really had much to do because she was the second daughter, and once she got into adolescence, even younger, she was a bit of a scamp. By the time her father died, Princess Margaret was in love with her father, King George VI's henchman or equerry, who was Group Captain Peter Townsend. At the time, I believe that the affair between them started. Peter Townsend was 15 or 20 years older than Princess Margaret. He was still married, and then he got divorced. So in the early years, and if you've watched The Crown, you know the basic facts, but there's a lot of stuff in that miniseries, The Crown, that is not factual. But anyway, that's a topic for another video. She wanted to marry Peter Townsend, but again, because he was divorced. Her sister, who by all accounts loved Margaret deeply, forbade it, so she gave him up. And then she got married in 1960 to a commoner, Anthony Armstrong Jones. In many ways they were well suited, but it was a very acrimonious relationship, and they were separated by the end of the 60s and divorced in 1978. Thereafter, or even before, certainly before the divorce was finalized, Princess Margaret had a string of younger lovers, led what, by the societal standards of the day, a scandal-ridden life. So that's the brief bio. This biography started out wonderfully, and I loved it for several chapters. So it's 99 bite-sized chapters, and I was really entranced with the structure because typically I hate biography. I avoid biographies like the plague because they're so effing boring. Start with birth and go to death, and there's no variation in the structure, and every last little detail is inserted, no matter how mundane. And so I really appreciated the way that this was shaped at the beginning. he played with chronology, and they were bite-sized chapters that kind of were organized around a theme, almost like little essays. And I thought, oh, this is the kind of biography that I wanted to exist, and now it does. And I really liked the way that he situated Princess Margaret within the culture of her day, both the way she shaped culture and the way that culture shaped her. And one of the more fascinating things that I learned early on was that we owe Princess Margaret a debt of gratitude, or, depending on your perspective, blame for the modern horoscope. She didn't invent it, but it was invented because of her. When she was born in 1930, some British newspaper hired an astrologer to write an article to predict what Princess Margaret's life would be like based on her astrological situatedness. And that column was so popular. Princess Margaret is a Leo. I could stop my review right there. Based on the popularity of that article, the newspaper encouraged this astrologer to actually do an astrological column, and he designed the star signs. Apparently they didn't exist. I can hardly believe that, but that's what the book said. So anyway, most of it must be true, so that the horoscope, the zodiac columns that have been so prevalent in the 20th and 21st centuries began because of Princess Margaret. So put that in your pipe and smoke it. All kinds of interesting stuff like that he wrote, he put into the biography, into these little vignettes, these little mini essays, and I was really fascinated by it. By the end, I would say I quite enjoyed it, but it was a 4-star read. Certainly, the book confirmed, if not elevated, her status as a contemptuous, maybe even often contemptible luminary in my private pantheon of the royals. I didn't realize quite how awful she could be. Even if only half of this is true, she could be just nasty. And those anecdotes were quite delightful at first. Craig Brown is a Fleet Street journalist, and like I say, I liked the way he played with the form, but he included some fictionalized chapters. For example, there's a short chapter imagining what the social reaction would have been if she had decided to marry Peter Townsend and renounce her royal status. And there were a few like that, and I quickly tired of those. So I don't like my biography to go too far off the beaten path. Now, maybe in the hands of a more capable writer, it would have worked for me. There was only a handful of those chapters, and I didn't like those. Ultimately, this book failed the page 112 test. I didn't do one. I didn't actually look at page 112 in isolation, but the farther it went on, the less good it got. It started out strong and finished weak. It just became mostly gossip by the end, and there's no shortage of gossipy anecdotes, and they all started to sound alike, so that I can't actually pull one out to share with you, because they've all got muddled in my mind because they were so repetitive. Princess Margaret would almost every night have a dinner party or go to a dinner party, and nobody could eat until she started to eat, and as soon as she finished eating, nobody was allowed to continue eating, and nobody could leave the party until she was ready to go, and she didn't ever go home till 4 a.m. Things like that. She was fairly petite and retained her beauty to a large extent until she died, certainly until she got very ill. But there's much made of how fat women got and their bodies and things, and that I got really tired and raised my hackles about that kind of gossipy tone. I would love to know what a female biographer, what a really woke, progressive female biographer would make of Princess Margaret. I would find it laughable if they made a feminist hero out of her, but certainly her life and the publicity and the scandal cries out for some kind of progressive analysis, because she wasn't treated very well. I thought that the chapter breaks, the structure kind of fell apart. They were short chapters. They continued to be short chapters, but basically the chronology or the theme continued. The chapter break seemed arbitrary by the end. It just seemed like he lost this biography the way a novelist can lose a novel or an artist can lose a painting. However, I still enjoyed it because I'm fascinated by Princess Margaret. This biography made me think about celebrity a lot, and that's the part where I like to poke and tease Americans when they poo-poo the monarchy, because it's basically, it's 7/10 celebrity, which, hello, America, and America treats its presidents and their families almost identically in terms of the publicity and celebrity status. Certainly it made me think about it, including, why did all these people listen to her when she would refuse to let them? Like, why didn't they just get up and go home? Like, that's the part, the awe, the intimidation, that so many people, famous people, but if she treated them badly, they didn't, with a very few exceptions, and the exceptions were delightful. They never stood up for themselves and they took the abuse. This book didn't really talk about what kind of a mother was she. I suspect she was a great mother because her two kids, who are not part of the royal family and lead basically, well-off commoner lives. They've got money, but they're not royals. And the son, Viscount Linley, he's a cabinet maker. The kids turned out all right, despite being the products of divorce and apparently whack job parents. But she must have done something right. Doesn't talk about that. I've taken him to task for concentrating too much on the gossip, and in a way that critique continues, but it now kind of flows into what to me was the heart of the book, which was a love letter she wrote to an old boyfriend, I think just before she split up with Tony, or just after, but she was still married. Anyway, a love letter that she wrote to some other man made its way into the public. It was up for auction or whatever, and there was no question that it was hers. It was on her stationery, it was her handwriting, and it's excerpted, or maybe in full, reproduced in full in the book. So again, I have issues about that, but it was so beautiful. It was full of true emotion, sincerely expressed, and deeply touching. So she was a real person, and I give Craig Brown some credit for giving at least some space in this biography for her to just be a person. It's the best biography of Princess Margaret I've read. I have some major problems with it. Like I say, a 4-star read. I was excited by the innovative structure of it, but it went off the rails. But it makes me interested to read other innovative biographies. So if you know of any, I don't care within reason who the biographies are of, but if you know of creative biographies, please put a comment, because I'm interested. I hate the traditional biography structure. So those are my thoughts on Ma'am Darling, 99 Glimpses of Princess Margaret by Craig Brown. Thanks for watching.